Welcome to Living Mirrors with Dr. James Cook. My guest this week is Gail Bradbrook. Gail is an environmental activist and is co-founder of Extinction Rebellion, a global environmental movement that focuses on using nonviolent civil disobedience to create change in the way that governments respond to the current climate and ecological crisis. She has a background in science with a PhD in molecular biophysics, and she brings both the scientific and a spiritual perspective to her understanding of how systems change can happen and the issues that we face. We discuss the work that Extinction Rebellion is currently focused on, but we also look at the kind of big picture psychological origins of the current dominant global culture and the way that it relates to nature that got us into this mess. And we also talk about the role that psychedelics can play in waking people up to this issue and changing our relationship to nature. Hope you enjoy the conversation. Okay, I'm here with Gail Bradbrook from Extinction Rebellion. Gail, thanks for coming on the podcast.
You're welcome. It's nice to be here.
So for people who maybe aren't following what's going on at the moment, would you mind saying a bit about what Extinction Rebellion is in your own words?
Sure. So we're a mass participation civil disobedience movement focused on the climate and ecological crisis. And it's the ecological is really important in that phrase. Both crises are here. And we came out of a network called Rising Up, which looked at the wider systemic issues that were creating crises and unable to respond to them. We were launched in October 2018 in the UK, and we rapidly spread to around 70 countries. I'm very focused on the UK, so I'm not really abreast of news from elsewhere. And in the UK, we've just been on the streets between the sort of 31st and last Thursday, September, which would have been about the 10th, I think. So we're always in active rebellion against our governments. We say the social contract's broken, and sometimes we go on the street to actively participate together in collective civil disobedience.
And so would you say, like, in addition to having actual kind of imminent demands, I feel like a lot of what you talk about seems to be maybe you might call consciousness raising or shifting people's, having kind of psychological impact on providing a vision for people, and is that a big part of it as well?
Yeah, I mean, I made a video about holistic theories of change because I think different people experience Extinction Rebellion in different ways, and so I would only really be sharing my perspective here, and I don't think this is for everybody, but I think there are a number of things going off with Extinction Rebellion, the on the street theory around civil disobedience and how disruption works to bring attention to issues, and there's lots of data and social science on that. I also think a really significant part of what we've done is to say it's terrifying, grief-stricken emotions that you feel if you really face the crisis that we're in, that humanity's killing life on earth, and including ourselves, and that people are dying today, and it's really gonna get worse. So I mean, looking at what's happening, for example, in Sudan at the minute, or in California, it's apocalyptical. And so we've always welcomed people's emotions, and I think facing and grieving our deepest emotions is a transformative act. There's a lot more to say. I mean, participating or supporting, I would say especially participating, and it's not for everybody participating in the front line of civil disobedience. It depends on your mental health status, what other duties you've got. Racially marginalised people might think twice about whether they'll get treated the same as people with white privilege and so on. But it can be a very initiatory act to kind of say no with your body to destructive systems and yes to life.
Yeah, I think that's a nice dimension, the kind of emotional dimension, which is that when you feel grief, as you say, and real empathy for nature, and you feel yourself to be part of it, and then when you're in that mode, there's no option apart from to kind of go out into the street, I guess, and really take action. I think that's a really powerful message. And so maybe could you say a bit more about the kind of current status of the kind of climate and ecological crisis for people who might not be following it as closely?
Yeah. Just to say more about the grieving stage, I mean, sometimes people often want to rush out on the streets, and obviously very welcome. At the same time, I generally encourage people to really sit with that and process it as part of a rebellious cycle, you know, especially not to do it on your own, because you can feel like you're going a little bit crazy with it. So I think that's really important. And yeah, so the current science is not good. You know, we've, in fact, today, David Attenborough in the UK is launching a film about extinction, that of order 1,000 species are likely to go extinct. Sorry, not 1,000. I think it's a million out of 7 million or something like that. Okay, I'm getting my figures wrong on that one. We're known to be in the sixth mass extinction event. You know, there have been 5 extinctions in the past. People are aware of the dinosaurs, for example. They're all related to carbon dioxide in one way or another, and other greenhouse gases. The kind of worst one was the Permian mass extinction, when something like 95 to 97% of all life died. And some scientists believe that we're emitting carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases at a worse rate than what happened in the Permian mass extinction. You know, we talk about what temperature rise might happen, and obviously if you have a sort of average global temperature rise, which we've already had of 1 degree, 1.1 from pre-industrial, it doesn't sound like a big deal, but it's how it impacts our very sensitive climate system. And you know, we already are seeing the ice caps melting, the Greenland ice sheet melting, and these are things that have feedback mechanisms built in. So when ice melts, so ice is white and it reflects the sun, so it helps to cool the planet. It's like our cooling system. But when it melts, it becomes dark sea. More heating is absorbed, and I mean, at the edge of this, the IPCC are the body in the world that looks at the science where there's consensus. And so the IPCC, like, I see them like as a backstop. You know, here's what we know as well as we possibly know in the kind of leading edge of science here. And there are also other papers and research studies that the IPCC won't necessarily use their data until it's been verified. And so there's a sense in that, but also, as an organisation focused on the precautionary principle, as in how bad could it be, we have to look at, you know, not any old bits of science on the margin, but like mainstream papers that are coming out. So, for example, this June, 20 institutions modelling with the biggest supercomputers said that the climate sensitivity may be 5 degrees C. What that means is that the carbon and other greenhouse gases that are in the atmosphere may create 5 degrees of warming. I mean, that science has since been disputed, and it's to do with clouds, what impacts the clouds have, and it's quite complex science, and so we're not sure. I think at the minute we're talking about heading towards between 3 and 4 degrees of warming, and the kinds of impacts we're talking about with that level of warming means in some places it'll be a hell of a lot hotter. Some places will be uninhabitable. You'll get increasing extreme weather effects which impact our food, to the fact that Anglia Ruskin University have said they think that civilized society will collapse by 2040 because of the impact on our food systems. And then I think last year NASA Goddard Institute said it would be sooner, or it's getting sooner. And obviously you can't tell, because this is not just about physical and ecological sciences, it's also about how we run our society. And as COVID has shown us, everything's stretched to kind of very limited, but in so-called efficiency means there's very little give in the system, just in time sort of logistics. So that's why, you know, just a little bit of panic buying around toilet rolls and people starting to fight over them in the shops. You know, I've been laughed at last year or 2018 when I was on the radio going, you know, people be fighting over tins of beans, and then within like a year that's like literally happening over toilet rolls actually. So maybe the last impact to say is that around 4 degrees of warming. That's according to Kevin Anderson, widely accepted by experts to be a temperature at which we can't adapt to within our current civilization. Also, the UK's own Committee on Climate Change said that in 2008 that was possibly beyond something we could adapt to. And then this June, they told the UK government to prepare for 4 degrees of warming. So essentially, they've said to the UK government, start to prepare for the collapse of civilization. I mean, nothing's guaranteed, right? But 4 degrees of warming, the impacts are believed to kill roughly half of the planet in terms of people. You know, again, according to Johan Rockström from Potsdam Institute. So those kinds of things that I'm talking about, you know, the vast majority of world at threat, facing existential risks and mass deaths and collapses of civilization. You're looking at starvation and war, and you know, if you want to read about that kind of apocalyptic breakdown, you know, Octavia Butler's novels like Parable of the Sower would, or you know, even The Handmaid's Tale, you know, it's that kind of scenario. I mean, it's fucking frightening.
Yeah. And so, I mean, you can see why in that situation, grief feels like, if you're really seeing it head on, that is an appropriate response to really kind of reckon with the situation we're in. But I think that something I really like in your perspective is you really seem to emphasize the kind of psychological, emotional, and spiritual origins of the kind of the problem we're in now. You know, it's deeper than just a particular economic system or a particular ideology. It seems to be something really that's been with us for a long time, that's been responsible for colonialism and just extraction of relentless kind of domination of nature. And in one of your talks, you referred to this Native American concept of Wetiko, which I think is this kind of points to the same thing. Maybe can you say a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that people often want to have one magic thing to point at, you know, like, so it's capitalism, and if we could get rid of capitalism, then we'll be fine. And then other people say capitalism will save us. And then other people would say we don't even have a functioning capitalism, you know, there's so much corruption around. The paradigm we live in, and I think Daniel Schmachtenberg is a really good person to listen into in terms of talking about this stuff, is one of domination and control. And the point about domination is, he says, well, is, you know, it wins because it's dominating. You know, if I was like in a pub and wanted to be the dominant person, like loads of people just want to sit and have a drink and a nice time. So, and probably a bit of a rubbish example, but you see what I mean. If you send something out on the internet that's kind of really pushy and aggressive, it's going to get more airtime than, you know, a bunch of Buddhists that have a quiet meditation over in the corner. So how do we and domination is not the story of human history, right? I mean, you know, they call it prehistory. We've been around for thousands of years before BC, and we know that humanity was evolving then. I mean, the sort of interesting concepts around the cave paintings and perhaps the emergence of new forms of consciousness that came from taking psychedelic plants. And people lived in alignment with nature. I mean, they made mistakes. I mean, I understand in some indigenous cultures that they have histories of knowing that they overkilled and destroyed the big mammals. So, you know, you have to, but do you have a culture that learns that it can only, it must take with care and caution, or do you have a culture that says whatever you want is yours if you can grab it, you know? So we have a really toxic culture, and I think Wetiko, seeing it as a mind virus that's in us all, is a helpful context, because it's, to me, it's telling us about two things really: what causes this thing, but also what's holding us back from addressing it. There's such a desire, isn't there, to sort of point the finger and say they're to blame, or to say, like, you know, before we just consume differently. And I think we have to look at a systemic level. What, you know, what's the system doing? It's allowing domination to dominate, and it's taken us in a frightening direction towards authoritarianism. Daniel Pinchbeck's written well about that recently. And how do you meet domination? You know, how do you meet it in an effective way? Uh, you know, I don't know the answer to that, but what I think is possibly the case, and you know, nice novels from Starhawk on this front, but is the ability to disobey a system and to be organised and disobey collectively, and so therefore not be pushed by domination. And I think that has to be done in a way that's not dominant, because if domination meets domination, it's just a battle of that, isn't it? So, you know, the phrase that Gandhi used was satyagraha, was truth force, love force. And then the other interesting part of that, which one hopes is emergent, is decentralization, which is a key part of the shift in consciousness that people talk about with teal consciousness. If sorry for all these references, folks. Maybe you'd have time to look some of them up and put them in the bottom. But the, you know, the spiral dynamics system looks at this kind of consciousness that's emerging. It includes and what's gone before and what's already here. You know, there's just different layers. Anyway, we don't get into that. But a key bit of teal is well, one bit is vulnerability, the other one is being purpose-led, and then the third bit is to be able to organise in a decentralised way. And a different way of saying that would be, it's like being an ecology. You know, that something of this ecology comes together and it creates things. Anyway, it's a big thing to talk about. I'm fascinated by the extent to which Extinction Rebellion, where we try and organise in that way, succeeds in all the places we would. It's just like being a toddler learning how to, you know, walk or read or something. So I think that that's the kind of bigger shift here, is like, how do we act as a collective body? Because I think the thing that inspires me and does make me feel hopeful, I just think the vast majority of people, on the whole, are decent, put us in a situation where the conditions are good. We want good things, you know. We don't want to screw people over and so on. You know, we just want a decent life, don't we? Yeah. Are these answers too long? I'm rattling on a bit.
That's perfect. Yeah. Yeah, I think I've heard you say in a few places that this, raising this point, that it's not really, we shouldn't be thinking in terms of the problem being the other, like, you know, saying, oh, that kind of person's the problem, right? And I think that view, it really resonates, the idea that it's all of us as collective humanity, you know. And going back to this kind of idea of Rutico, maybe to unpack it a bit more, is, you know, it's like there's a certain psychological, emotional, spiritual dynamic going on, where as a culture we're kind of collectively traumatized and pushed in the direction of kind of narcissism, right? I've heard you speak about this as well, of like self-concern, and life becomes about satisfying your own needs in the present moment, and kind of completely ignoring kind of ancestors in the past and people to come in the future. And I think I like that you managed to keep hold of that very, very zoomed out, big picture view of the deep origins of the issues, whilst also thinking, well, today, what do we do to kind of urgently affect change, right? And I think you have a kind of holistic model of how to affect change, right?
I mean, like everybody else, I'm grasping at straws in some ways and having a go with a bunch of other people. So I wouldn't want to get into some kind of arrogant hubris that I know what to do. But and it just, in some ways, it's like, it's the most, you know, my background's in science and I have a naturally sort of problem solving brain that you give it an issue and it's like trying to figure out what's supposed to be done here. And I think it's to meet this crisis with curiosity and fresh thinking is like a joyful thing to do on the whole. So, you know, when you're talking about individuals, I mean, we've just done an action which was fucking epic, to be honest, like in the UK, where the printing presses of Rupert Murdoch papers and beyond, the other right-wing papers, were blocked for a full night, and it delayed the papers getting on the high streets. And boy, we've poked the beast in the eye, because they're foaming at the mouth, the establishment, right? They're so cross. And, you know, there are individuals that wield enormous amounts of power, and people talk about sociopaths, don't they? And to what extent does this culture create them, and to what extent do we enable them? And actually, my understanding is that some versions of neurodiversity have their uses in the moment. Like I think I've probably got ADHD that's trauma related, and we're quite impulsive apparently. So if there's a burning building, we'd be the ones that would run in and try and do something, where other people be more like a bystander. And then I think, looking to the systemic, I really like the way Charles Eisenstein writes as well. Like, which one of us wouldn't be doing what the chief exec of some, polluting, nasty corporations doing if we hadn't gone on that person's path? And especially in the UK, with the way the class system runs and what we do to our sort of upper class people, and we get removed from their families at a young age and go into a boarding school where there's bullying, and that's absolutely baked into the culture. So separation and bullying. And I think I had a sense once or twice actually on a psychedelic journey of the despair that leaves, and how you can fill that with wanting power, how power can fill the vacuum that being separated creates. And so there are people that specialize on healing the trauma of our upper class people, and I think that.
Okay, we just cut out there, but we are now back. So you were just saying there are people who specialize in healing the trauma of the upper classes.
And I work with this really fantastic woman, Mickey Kashtan. Again, another person really worth checking out her work if you haven't come across it. And she's talked about purpose-led healing recently, and which I realise I have been undertaking the last few years. Which is, if you've decided that your purpose in life is to do whatever you can to raise awareness and make a crisis that we're in less bad, or whatever, do what you can to protect life on Earth, then what healing is needed in order to serve that purpose? So I mean, so I want to be clear on that, actually, that I don't particularly subscribe to this idea, if we all shift consciousness, that everything's going to be fine in the world because we're a mirror of the world outside. I mean, I understand where that's coming from, and I think there's some validity, but if we're having to wait for everybody to shift, we also have to bear in mind that we're in a society that's re-traumatizing us all the time. Right? So, like, for example, as a white person, I can do, and I must do what I can, I believe, to understand how racism is showing up in me. But as I once heard in a TED talk, it's like keeping your teeth clean. It's not like having your tonsils removed. Do you see what I mean? It's so you have an ongoing need to recover from a society that's telling you that what you need is little ones playing in the bushes here. What you need is, if you're a white privileged person, not just white, but you know what I'm saying, if you're in a Western culture, just keep your head down, earn what you can, and spend your money. It's constant pressure to do that, right? So I would say we have to change the system. And so you focus on this is my thinking. I mean, I'm, open to other ideas, but you focus on what leverage you have and you can do around systemic change, and then the kind of personal journey within that is, what's getting in the way of me doing that work. Do you see what I mean? The difference between sort of try and just, because we're full of trauma, right? Which you're going to start with. Well, for me, in the last couple of years, been on this journey where I've been organising with a social movement. It's like there's so much that I've had to learn around how power works when I got power that and expect and wasn't aware of, and how it feels to be blamed for things at times, and you're like, oh, people don't like me, all that nonsense, or the opposite, where people are like, celebrating you, and like, fuck, what the needs that we have, like, we can, like, so I have a frozen need for approval, right? It's like old trauma. Please approve of me. The minute people are approving of me, I'm like, oh, will you stop? It's awful. So all sorts of baggage we carry, isn't there? And which bit do we need to kind of work on? So I think it's an interesting journey for each of us.
Yeah, I mean, as these kind of social species that, as you say, have been kind of atomized and traumatized, like when it comes to organizing socially, you know, in politics or any other way, we're constantly triggering each other's traumas unconsciously, I think, which is what leads to this kind of toxic mess of that we're currently in. You know, instead of social organizing being something positive and collaborative, it's just this, you know, when people don't even understand what's happening, kind of by definition, it's unconscious. You know, when these traumas are triggered, and as you say, it's happening in all of us. You know, the most kind of saintly person probably still has their own issues, and that's partly why I'm kind of advocate for psychedelic medicine, because I see that as a really as a catalyst for healing these kinds of things. And am I right that kind of ayahuasca played a crucial role in actually the origins of Extinction Rebellion?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about that. I'm by no means an expert in psychedelic medicines, but I think again, I strongly suspect the purpose, the purpose to which people take these medicines is really important. You know, you sort of hear of people getting the kind of message from the psychedelics that there's God within us, and then starting to think that they're godlike or something on a kind of like massive ego trip way. I mean, I think one should consider quite carefully what it is we're asking for. I mean, quite often people take psychedelics without a clear purpose in mind, and that's not generally been my path. So, yeah, I've been part of. I mean, you know, like people have taken magic mushrooms as a young person and thought there was something more here. I always had that sense, and then had the good fortune to be part of a path where nature is honoured, and there's a ceremony around the use of the medicines, you know, and working on that path on issues in my own spirit and self that need dealing with. So I mean, I guess it was sort of 2015, I'd done a year of therapy on a particular sort of addiction, and yeah, I've been working on my shit for years, right? I mean, with co-counselling for some time, with transformational breathing, with yoga, with you know, the whole shaboodle, as I say. And I was just a bit sick of it. And I was ready for, like, I mean, in a way, kind of throw my consciousness off a cliff and see what happens. So it was actually iboga that I think was incredibly significant. I went to Costa Rica, and I always feel the need to say I'm not good with flying and all that. It was a big decision to make, and I paid a tax on myself, you know, planted some trees I don't believe in offsetting, in order to make that trip, and I am really glad I made it. So I went to a centre, New Life, ayahuasca New Life iboga, where I did the first week was iboga, so I took a so-called taster session amount of iboga, which was horrendous. I went into abject despair, and then the flood dose, which was the most terrifying thing I've ever done, but it was actually incredibly beautiful and healing. And then we had Cambo, and then we had 3 ayahuascas. So it was a lot of medicine in 2 weeks. And I had 2 main purposes, I guess. One was the inner and one was the outer. So the inner was like, I guess, without getting into it, not because I'm private, just because I think it's boring. Everybody should know. If you want to know more, I've talked on Breaking Convention about it. But I went to deal with some internal issues, and anxiety in particular, I suppose, and joylessness. And then I had this big question of, like, you know, what are the codes for social change? Because I'd heard, oh gosh, what's his name? The dear old psychonaut we lost, Terence McKenna. Heard Terence McKenna talking about the codes in the higher consciousness, and so I thought, well, you know, we've been trying to do things for years, like what's the codes for social change? And people may have heard this story, but anyway, I came back from that trip. I tried to start a mass tax disobedience, and as a result of that, I'd been in communication with Roger Hallam. He'd done a lot of research that was really helpful, next steps information, and he told me after a 4-hour meeting of sharing a lot of information, backwards and forwards actually, but that he'd just given me the codes for social change. So it was the real hair on the back of the neck moment when, you know, your prayer is so very directly and blatantly answered. And the other things happen with ayahuasca where, like, a year later, a thing that was going off on that journey at the time. You just didn't understand, and then it kind of falls into place. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, before the April Rebellion, 12 of us from Extinction Rebellion went off to work with ayahuasca. I mean, the main medicine I've worked with is peyote, but yeah, with this ayahuasca, and God, it was. I mean, I often people have the most beautiful experiences with ayahuasca, don't they? I just get my fucking arse kicked, and some. I'm telling you, it's just horrendous. I had this experience when I felt like I wasn't in existence anymore. It was the whole of humanity. It also sounds quite, I don't know, anyway, it sounds arrogant, but it's just what the experience was, right? And the grandmother ayahuasca, she kept asking all of humanity, have you had enough yet? Have you had enough yet? And it was about the industrial society, and my body was just, I was throwing up, and I was, well, frankly, I wet myself, I was just all over the place, like, writhing. The people who were holding the space were, there with their, their wings and smudges and that, trying to support whatever healing was going off. I don't really understand this, but I tell you what, we had the fucking most awesome April Rebellion afterwards, and for sure, of course, right. There were incredible people organising in Extinction Rebellion in the UK, right? And I wouldn't claim anything above and beyond their absolute hard work. Just sometimes the thing we get away with, the synchronicities, I just have a sense of being deeply supported somehow. I don't know whether it's neuroplasticity or whether it's, I just watched David Bohm's life story that's just come out online. Have you seen that?
Yeah, I watched the documentary. Yeah.
Yeah,
Infinite
it's
potential,
cool,
is that what it's called?
Yeah. So the sort of physical, the quantum mechanical theory of the energy that connects us all, and I mean, I'm guessing that that's therefore where the possibility of morphic resonance and sharing of consciousness and information on a different level might happen. I mean, I'm just really fascinated by the possibility that this stuff has science behind it. I'm not like up for just generally thinking everything's magic. I mean, I just think it can let in. I live in a community where there's lots of people are into sort of alternative stuff, and a lot of it I'm quite skeptical about, frankly.
Yeah, I think I guess we both have these kind of science backgrounds, and so we're probably poised at a similar fringe of the fringe, I guess, halfway between the science and the spirituality. But so I guess I understand that Extinction Rebellion doesn't have an official stance on psychedelics, but last year in 2019, I think you called for a kind of mass psychedelic civil disobedience, which I thought was a wonderful thing to suggest, given the absurdity that these things are illegal, right?
Yeah, I mean, given that two things, the science is really clear that they're really healing, and especially, with the boga and the psilocybin mushrooms, that microdosing has had really great efficacy around both addiction and depression, and, things that PTSD and so on. Like, why on earth would they not be legal? And having them be legal is would mean that we can have them be safer,
Yeah.
I mean, it's sort of really, really obvious that the way they threaten this current status quo is the reason why they're not legalized. And it's not to say there's no dangers with psychedelics, but people are taking them anyway. So, like, it's better that we have some. So, if you wanted to take something, you could go to somebody who is regulated and had experience that you could trust. I mean, it took me a long time before I found a centre that I thought was the right one. I wanted one that both had a sort of medical stance. So there was a doctor in the room when I was taking Iboga who was taking my blood pressure every 20 minutes, and then there was a ceremony as well. So I wanted to make sure that both things were in place. So yeah, I mean, personally, I think, I mean, there are people in the psychedelics communities that push back against doing massive disobedience, who think that it may be, may have a bad effect. and there's always risks with any strategy, but I often wonder if people are really, really getting how far gone we are in terms of crisis. And I don't, to the extent you talk about climate and ecological crisis, I mean, the crisis in our so-called democracy and the path we're on towards authoritarianism, towards fascism, it's not something to be just hoping that this sort of long arm of progress is going to sort out. I think, again, I think it may be Schmachtenberger that talks like this. That you're in this like increasingly complex world where we've now got this madness of QAnon conspiracy, meta conspiracy theory going off, and people's trust in information and change and the ability to change things being deeply compromised, and capturing some people. Yeah, anyway, that mess, and the complexity of the world in general in terms of how things are produced and how we live. That degree of complexity, at least according to Daniel, goes in two directions. One, I think Daniel, I don't want to be misquoting him, but goes in the direction of absolute chaos and destruction and decay, or leaps up a level into a new manifestation of how people operate and organize. I mean, and quite possibly, presumably, both things can be happening at the same time. You could get the seeds of a new society and the destruction all around, and I don't know which one wins out, but I think it goes back to that other point around, Wetiko and indigenous cultures. This is not a time to sit on the fence, really, is it? It's a time to, I don't think anyway, I don't want to judge anybody's life, we'll do what we can, but it's a time to think why are you here now and what you're meant to be doing.
Yeah. And do you think psychedelics can have a role in moving, forward the way we think about the kind of like ecological crisis, given that, I mean, there's now, published scientific papers showing that psychedelics increase ecological mindedness and anti-authoritarian thinking, and so, as well as the ability to kind of heal the traumas that are underlying this in the first place. To me, it seems like there's a real potential for them to be a big part of the movement.
I think it's a no-brainer, really, to be honest. And I wouldn't necessarily say it's for everybody. And there are other pathways that do the same kind of thing, aren't they? With like, I imagine anyway, that do different things with your brain functioning, so like meditation pathways and so on. But it's what I go back to with the purpose-led healing. As individuals, what is it you need to heal? But I guess, like, there'd be a question for me if people are working with psychedelics. So, like, what are you doing differently in your life? Are you doing anything differently? I mean, we all want to feel better, right? I mean, we all want to. I mean, it's the basis of Buddhism, isn't it? That people seek happiness. I think there's that kind of, I'm sure Buddhist philosophy would say this a lot better. There's that kind of superficial happiness when, something that you're not enjoying is removed, or something that you want, you get, but it's transient, and then you're always going to be grasping, aren't you? And some people that I know that take psychedelics, it feels like they need yet another hit of, communion with the divine or something, and maybe we do. Maybe we need to go back to the source. Maybe that is how it is for some people. And I just wonder, like, when do we? It goes back to what I said earlier. What we say is setting of our intentions when we take these medicines. And then what I was going to say about happiness is what I found is, you're definitely way happier person since I took the iboga, and it kind of felt like literally rewired my brain. But I don't feel like I seek happiness. I think there's something deeper about feeling that you're honouring your purpose.
Yeah. I think another kind of neat thing, I guess, with plant medicines is that I suspect the reason they exist is in part is a kind of evolutionary dynamic of nature trying to rein us in, trying to have the effect they have of especially something like mushrooms. And so it would, as you kind of say, it's a no-brainer. It would be silly to ignore that that mechanism that nature has offered us that kind of would bring us into alignment with it. And yeah, I think you talking about that kind of happiness that comes from within rather than through gratification and consumption. Whenever I think of the place of the kind of the planet just kind of spinning through space kind of forever, I always think like, what is the end game for the current system? You know, the current system is make sure you're, you know, consume so you're happy right now, and the next generation do it again, do it again, do it again, and it's not going anywhere. You know, we're already home is the feeling I have. You know, when you look at the Earth, pictures of the Earth from space, it's like, well, we're already here, and if we can stop and turn inwards and find nourishment through this kind of well-being that's within us. But I think the problem is this trauma, that people can't do that because unconsciously they're looking to satisfy this kind of hungry ghost inside them, that, to use the kind of Buddhist equivalent, you know, and they're constantly fleeing from this trauma. So yeah, I mean, this takes us far from, I guess, the direct action stuff that you're currently engaged in, but I think it's a crucial part. And I mean, I guess, do you see there being a parallel between the way that psychedelics can suddenly like wake people up to what's going on and the kind of actions you're doing? You know, it feels like the actions Extinction Rebellion are doing almost push society into an altered state where suddenly people are like, oh yeah, the climate is, you know, a big issue, you know, which isn't the message they're getting from the press, you know, in the most part.
I mean, I think we arrived at a particular zeitgeist where you had the 2018 IPCC report. There was some quite freaky science papers like the Hothouse Earth paper that was out at that time. David Attenborough was changing the sort of films he was making. Mark Carney, who's the governor of the Bank of England, was also speaking out. You know, you have Jen Bendel's work, Professor Bendel, on deep adaptation. So I think there were a number of, you know, Greta Thunberg was just starting to sit outside her parliament, you know. She actually came to our launch in the October. She wasn't really a known person then, but so yeah, there's been a moment when consciousness has shifted, hasn't it? And I think then, you know, it's asking us all, like, what are we going to do with that when we've got that information, especially if you feel some responsibility. Not everybody does, do they, for future generations? You know, being a parent certainly puts that into sharp focus, or if you're a auntie or uncle or grandparent or whatever. Are you really, I think people often have, what do I want people to think of me and my generation in years to come? And then look back and think, what were you thinking of, what were you playing at? So I mean, some of it's like personal changes that people make, don't they, like reducing flying or reducing meat and dairy consumption or going vegan, or, you know, reducing plastics and so on, and cycling instead of driving and all this sort of stuff. But it's, and then, you know, you do have like you know, 10% of the population do 50% of the emissions. So and especially when you get into the super rich, they do an incredible amount of emissions. But when you look at that, what that's actually telling you, and look at other issues, you have to deal with inequality. You know, it's like a political issue underneath the climate ecological emergency. It's not an individual thing. Again, it's systemic, isn't it? So, and that's, I think, like basically why the right have resisted the climate ecological piece as much as they can. And when you say, like, you know, we're already home, what's this system driving at? You know, I mean, they're already talking about trying to get minerals off asteroids and colonize space. I don't like I'm quite a sort of science nerd, really. I think exploration is really cool. It's just at what cost and what we're doing instead, or what we're not doing instead, you know, that I would sort of ask us. And if we're putting all our eggs in the basket of, well, we can just hop off this planet and onto another, when this one's just, you know, that's my understanding of the second coming, actually. I just think this is heaven on earth, isn't it? When nature is thronging. I went to a small organic farm recently where the air was thick with insects and there was loads of little birds, and it was like, oh, you know, what else do you want to call heaven on earth other than this? You know, snap with some trees here. Like, do you want some like neon lights and baubles on there as well? I mean, how does it get more heavenly? It's just beautiful, isn't it? So that ability to source ourselves from nature is so important. And yeah, I think again I'm speaking to the shifts that have to the things that have to change are systemic, and it is political. You know, I mean, it's sort of become such a dirty word, politics, but I feel like that's part of what the domination system wants us to go. It's like, ugh, don't want to be part of that. One of the phrases that Extinction Rebellion uses beyond politics, and what we mean is beyond party politics. You know, this is bigger than like a tribal fight between this party and that party. This is about telling the truth, acting now, and then making the changes that are necessary. And like there are debates within that, but that's why we want citizens' assemblies, which are emergent forms of democracy that I think upgrade our democracy because they're so less affected by vested interest.
Right.
Yeah.
So then, I guess to end on, what's the you've just completed a series of protests and demonstrations. What's the kind of near future or long-term future look like for Extinction Rebellion?
Again, a UK perspective right here, and my perspective as well. We as I think I said earlier, we tickle the nose of the tiger, and they are doing hit jobs on us left, right, and centre. Stuff coming out today, I think, about me and the people that block the printing presses. They've gone across their private lives on their social media. They've doorstepped their family. I mean, this is what the system does, right? So there's lots of attacks, and it will no doubt unsettle some people. So we just get to weather that storm, because, you know, as Gandhi said, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they attack you, and then you win. So I was sad, and then they say it was their idea in the first place. I'm focused on money rebellion, because I think we have to really point at the systemic issues as much as possible now. We've had 2 years of, saying there's a crisis, saying it has to have urgent action, and the reality is, depending on which government you're part of, the policies are in the opposite direction to where they need to be. It's not even that they're slow, it's just that they're doing the opposite things. Like in the UK, we're investing, I hate that word, in new roads, 27.5 billion, and we've got this high-speed rail link that's smashing through trees. So systemic stuff, and our interaction with the system is through our work, and obviously we have some power there, but it's very hard to organise strikes these days because the trade unions had their teeth taken out because they are such a threat. And, I'd obviously welcome that. But where we're focused is on debt and tax. So how much of our taxes is being used to destroy the planet, and should we withhold that, those of us that can? We're being asked to participate in a finance system that's based on debt, and debts requires interest payments. Interest payments require a growing economy. A growing economy destroys the planet and the people who are part of it. There's a more detailed economic analysis that you could get into, but I think that general analysis is more or less correct. So, why are we paying interest on debts? Why don't we just give the money? Why don't we just stop paying the debts? Why don't we just give the money where it's needed? Now, you can do that as an individual, and you're just likely to get yourself into quite a lot of financial straits. We've got lots of legal and financial information for folks, but what we're doing is what's called conditional commitment. So this is the collective, isn't it? It's paralysing. The collective is saying to people, would you stop paying your mortgage if 5,000 people joined you from the same bank, or 10,000 or 50,000 or whatever? So what we're really needing rebels to do is get on the phone and ring other rebels up and check what they're up for, and organise a sort of collective. Some people do what you call vanguard actions. Some small businesses going to take actions together, and that would be great to build that up. So small businesses given a small amount of money that they're apparently supposed to give to government to a fund for green businesses. Another part of it is making donations on behalf of banks. So where banks are funding destruction, we're going to do reparations in advance, take out a credit card, give the money to Survival International, work with and support Indigenous communities. So it's a really important part of civil disobedience is visioning the future that you want to see, that the actions speak to that change that you want, and that's what we're trying to do with Money Rebellion. I've got to talk about it online if people are interested, and it'd be great if it was taken up in other countries where it makes sense to. They'd have to get their own legal stuff together.
Yeah, I definitely recommend you can find that talk on YouTube, and also I recommend people check out David Graeber's book "Debt: The First 5,000 Years," which is a really thoughtful exploration of this issue. He unfortunately passed away last week, and we lost him too soon. But so I guess if people are motivated,
he was going to just say he was really excited about Money Rebellion. He was going to come and speak on the Thursday, so he was lovely. He was lovely.
And so if people are motivated to get involved either with Money Rebellion or your other activities, where should they head?
I mean, yeah, the Extinction Rebellion's website, whether the global site or the UK site, depending where you're based, and find your nearest local groups. And there's usually sort of various forms you can fill out to say where your interests lie. Probably quite a few people are resting up a little bit at the minute, but people will be in touch. And yeah, just I sort of like, I guess, encourage people, and I'm sure the people listening to this podcast are doing this anyway, but there's something about embracing life and embracing these times that's really, really liberating. I mean, it's also horrendous and it's also frightening, but you know, life's meant to be lived, isn't it? To be present to what's happening. It's not as much as you might have a day when, or some period when you're having a bit of meltdown about it all, you come out the other side and maybe find yourself on the street singing with the samba band, dancing in a new way, and it's joyful. I love it, actually. It's not like it's often a pleasure.
Yeah, it's really nice to kind of showing a joyous way of being in the world that kind of, you know, shows what things could be like rather than a kind of morose, I guess, way of doing it. And if people want to look up like your presence online, where can they find you?
I mean, if you just put my name in YouTube, there's various videos and stuff like that, you know. I don't have a Gail website. Thankfully, I haven't got, I was going to say narcissistic, but I suppose people do that for good reason. So, but yeah, I'm just, you know, I'm around. There's loads of us making Extinction Rebellion happen. So it sometimes feels a bit odd when you get made the special person. You know, we're all contributing. It's a big team effort.
Great. Well, thank you for making the time today. I've really appreciated it.
It's really nice to meet you. I'll go and get back to child duties.
Yeah.